Hi there and welcome along to On the Whistle. I'm your host, Zayn Nabbi. Sitting next to me is my man, Alasdair, our cross-platform reporter and new recruit in the CNN digital team. Ali, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Kind of excited to have started a new job at CNN, but always far more excited to be back on the podcast.
Exactly. He's not writing baseball, and if you don't believe me, go and follow him online. Someone who we're used to hitting home runs on this podcast and at my 40th is Francis Nkwain. Francis, where in the world are you?
I'm actually in London, just stalking you, waiting for you outside of your house. After all the tumbles I took during our baseball game.
Don't let Francis fool you. At my 40th birthday, which was recently, we played over 40s versus under 40s. The over 40s won, with Francis being one of the stars. He's actually a slugger, and boy, oh boy, he can run so quickly, he laps people while coming home. I wish I had the video. But Francis, it's good to be here. We have a bite-sized pod today. So much to talk to, but so little time. We're going to get right into it. We're going to have two big talkers today. One being Mo Salah and what's going on with his form at Liverpool. And the second one being on the final Confederations and CAF Champions League ahead of the Super League next year. So some good topics for us to get into. We can really sit here and spitball for a long time, but we're going to try condense it and keep it concise for you. So to start off with, we have our friend of the show, Ahmed Yusuf, also the editor of kingfoot.com. He starts off by giving us his analysis on Mohamed Salah and what he thinks is going on with the Egyptian king at Liverpool. Take a listen to this.
So Mo Salah's had a lot of criticism this season. He's only scored 2 goals out in the first 6 games, which was the slowest start for him in the Premier League. Now, some people are saying that the increase in his wages has led to him being a bit more relaxed and that he's not really bothering to play now. He's got that big wage increase and the new contract. Some are saying that he's being placed out of position out wide and he's not receiving the ball as much. But I mean, I've been looking around and his wide position is kind of, if you look at some heat maps, it's where he's predominantly been over the last couple of years anyway. So he's not necessarily playing much wider than he has. And I'm starting to think that him and look at Son, for example, is struggling this season. Son's not even scored a single goal yet, and they were both the joint Ballon d'Or winners. The joint top goal scorers last season. So I think there's a case of defenders really studying them very well, Son and Salah, and trying to stop them from scoring. We also have to add the fact that Liverpool have lost Mane, and they definitely look like a weaker side without him. He did a lot of the hard work. He was a very creative player. A lot of people don't, they underestimate Mane's creativity, and it's clear that Salah and Liverpool as a whole are lacking that. And I think it's actually a Liverpool problem really as a whole. They kind of seem to have lost their identity. That high gegen press isn't working as well, because they seem to be struggling defensively, and I think they're actually not being as great in attack, and they're not being as threatful when they go forward because they know that they're very vulnerable now. And we saw Van Dijk struggling this season as well. So it's not just him. I think there's a number of players in that Liverpool squad struggling, and as a whole, that's a real concern for Liverpool. And let's not forget, despite all of this, I think he's actually been playing quite well generally.
So that was Ahmed Yusuf giving us his breakdown on Mohamed Salah's slow start to the season. Francis, I know you have a hot take on this. What do you think? What is the Egyptian king getting wrong?
I think it's a bit tough to lay the blame at Salah's door for Liverpool's sort at this moment. I think, okay, it's the start of the season. Like Ahmed points out, if you look at a player like Son, who was a joint top goal scorer the season gone, he too hasn't hit form. Sometimes it takes time to get going when it's also new personnel. I think the challenge that Liverpool has less to do, or the challenge with Salah has less to do with how much money he's making, and more the necessity of maybe building new automatisms with the new personnel that they have. It's pretty much at times a new front three, bar the suspension that came the way of Nunez, for example. Technically, it's Diaz and it's him, and there's a new dynamic there. And then you have this real challenge in Liverpool now, which is in the middle of the park. But I will say something that comes from the heart, less from the head. Um, I think Mane, Liverpool should have fought harder to keep Mane at the club because
Amen.
he
Couldn't
brings
agree with
more
you
than
more.
goals. Yes, it's like, and I found it kind of shocking that it's like having a Messi wanting to leave a club and you just go, okay. That's how it almost felt because he is that to us as Africans. He is that to football,
Mm.
and he didn't leave to go to some Mickey Mouse club. A Bayern Munich is fighting tooth and nail to get him. And Liverpool almost seemed a bit nonchalant about it. And I'm
Mm.
not saying it's an either or between him or Salah. I'm saying just fight a little bit more to keep the guy. And that's one of the reasons why he continued his journey, because I think he also felt underappreciated where he was, because he is more than goals. So Salah, I'm not jumping on a bandwagon to punish him or to criticize him or anything. I think he'll hit his stride. He is playing well. He just isn't scoring goals. He's hit the post, I think, a couple of times. He's had at least 7 year misses. So it's not a question of whether he's out of form. He's just not maybe hitting the net as often as he should. But I think that will come when he builds the partnerships that are necessary and he understands. And again, even the point Ahmed makes about him playing out on the right, that's where Mane used to play when he just came to the club before Salah arrived. And he was one who moved out left to accommodate Salah at the right. But there was a fluidity to their game, and I think they will find it again, and he will come trumps. And I'll be happy if Salah's doing well at Liverpool and Mane is doing great at Bayern. But most importantly, that the midfield never gets sorted, and Liverpool then don't even qualify for Europa League.
Now, Francis, Courtney's not here to defend his team, but
That was
as
for
Royal
him.
Red Devil, we expect nothing more. I will say this: Mohamed Salah's played a lot of football this season. He's at the AFCON, he's at the World Cup qualifiers. He's gone deep with Liverpool on many fronts. Maybe a break over the World Cup will help him. Alasdair, what's your hot take?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple things. I think firstly, I agree with Ahmed in terms of I don't think he's playing it that badly. I mean, I saw a stat the other day that he's actually he's created the most goal scoring chances in the Premier League. I think by almost 10 more than the next. And this is a league where we've been celebrating like Kevin De Bruyne and these players who are incredibly creative. And meanwhile, Salah, who's getting a lot of criticism, has actually created more chances than De Bruyne, and so yeah, I think he's not playing in the ruthless way in which he has done, but I think he's not playing terribly. But the other thing I would say that I feel like hasn't really been picked up on it by a lot of people is I think we don't appreciate the weight that has been on this man's shoulders. Like playing for Klopp over the last however many years, this intense football, getting to Champions League finals, and then this last season he played every single game possible. Only Sadio Mane played as much as him because no one else had to play an AFCON as well as playing every single Premier League, Champions League, League Cup, FA Cup, But I think as well as something we really underestimate, particularly when we're here in the UK, is the kind of climate in which he comes from. The stat that I've always find really funny is who's the most followed player in Arsenal's team on their social media. When you have all these it's Mohamed El Neni. And that's because Egypt is just a crazy, crazy football country.
So you're telling me it's not Ahmed Yusuf? Well, I tell you, Francis and I are stumped by that one.
Exactly.
Completely shocked.
And I think Egypt, along with I would say a few other countries in the world, I would throw in your Nigerias, your Brazils, your Argentinas. I would say there's just a few countries in this bracket of football crazy nation that also have massive A, population, but B, kind of social media following, where the weight has been so much on Salah, and particularly in this Egyptian context, because he's arguably and almost inarguably Egypt's best ever player, but he doesn't have that mantle. He hasn't been able to take it from the likes of Abu Trika because he's never won an AFCON, and this entire year was about him building up to that AFCON and playing with one of the worst Egyptian sides. Let's face it, carrying this Egyptian side first to the World Cup in 2018, then to the AFCON final. Let's remember how poor of a team they were really, and how they kind of just bullied their way past better teams like Morocco and Cameroon. Apologies, Francis.
I understand.
But and then to lose that and to lose the World Cup qualifier against the same team in the same way on penalties. It does not get worse than that. And I think, like you're saying about the World Cup, this guy needs a break. Like, he needs a rest. He needs a sabbatical. And the problem is, you know, if you're Pep Guardiola, if you're a coach, you can take that sabbatical. If you're a player, you can't, because you've got that narrow window where you can actually play. And so I think there's an element of, you know, and as well as, you know, this was one of the shortest summers we've ever seen in terms of rest because of the World Cup. So he didn't even get a summer to rest fully. So I think there's that. I think it's something that we really underestimate when we're not in Egypt or in one of these countries where the kind of pressure, you know, we've seen similar stuff with Neymar. The pressure of playing for Brazil is too much. And I think that's a huge thing. I think Salah, he just needs a quick break. He needs a rest, because the skill is there, the talent is there, the drive is there. But, you know, maybe his mind more than anything, just he needs some rest. He needs a break, and then he can
But
get
going with your argument, therefore, you're actually agreeing that he's not up to form.
Yeah, I think that's what I would say. Is I think he's, you know, I would say, you know, his drop in form hasn't been particularly this season as much as we think it is. But I do think if we look at this last calendar year since the AFCON, particularly what's been lacking is that ruthlessness. You know, we have.
I understand. What I'm trying to say is that going with your argument, therefore, he needs pressure to be on top of his game, because now he doesn't have it, because they're not going to the World Cup. Nobody's expecting anything of him. He should then be scoring more. But you're saying when he doesn't have pressure, he doesn't perform.
Well, more, I think, when you have that kind of pressure on you for X amount of years, then you need the break. But it's true. It's true. It's true. You know, now he has no excuse. And what I will think we'll see, you know, maybe we'll have hindsight in this, is to see how does he play after the World Cup.
Sure.
Because, you know, he'll come back, you know, and I think that's why this year is really unique, because you'll have players like him or Haaland and players who are elite athletes and who will get the break that they need, you know, and the break that a lot of these other players won't get.
And the goal is to peak for the Ivory Coast, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's very true. And it's a beautiful thing and a great point you make, because especially in this league where we find ourselves here in the Premier League, where we happen to be geographically located, we've never had this December break. A case has always been made for how it can't be had. So now it's not December. It will happen in November and touch a little bit of December until the 16th. But I think an argument will be made for the coming couple of years afterwards about just how beautiful the football will be afterwards. Because I think a lot of players will not be going to the World Cup. The vast majority of the talents will not be going to the World Cup. So they will be taking a break. And it would be interesting to find out what the clubs will be doing to maintain the fitness of their players. They haven't really explained what the downtime is really going to look like. Everybody's focused on the players who are going, but there'll be a whole lot of players who won't be. Will they be allowed to return to their home countries? What's the diet going to be like when you get back home? And you're supposed to be ready to go come the 17th of December with a supercharged schedule that might now be carrying another 2 weeks of fixtures that are being taken off since we lost our queen over here. So it'll be interesting to see.
Well, listen, this was meant to be a bite size. It's now going to turn into a full podcast. And you know why? Because we have some fantastic talkers around this pride. So if you're listening in, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead, post a comment below. Tell us what you think. Tell us whether you think Mohamed Salah's in bad form. If he is, why is he? If he isn't and we're being too critical, tell us why. You can tweet us, hit us up on on Instagram too. The account is the same, OTW_podcast. And on Facebook, come and talk to us. It's the On the Whistle podcast, and also the very same handle for YouTube. And if you haven't heard it, On the Whistle podcast. So let's hear from you. We love it. We love the debate. We love the discussion. We love the bands. And now we're going to transition from Europe to Africa. We have the last edition of the Confederations and CAF Champions League taking place. This is before the Super League, the African Super League, comes into effect next year, which is hopefully going to strengthen our football on the continent, give us a product that we can market, and also give our players a better platform to play and perform. At least that is the hope of CAF and those backers from FIFA and the other stakeholders. Alasdair, we've seen the African Super Cup already take place. Very exciting football to look forward to.
Yeah, we saw what a great product we do have on the continent in the game between Berkane and Wydad. And I mean, obviously there was so much controversy in around the Champions League final about being in Morocco, but one of the perks of having two teams from the same country playing in winning both the Champions League and Confederations Cup is that means you got a great super cup. And it was a game not super entertaining in the goal in the fashion in terms of getting goals, but I think it was a really exciting game, certainly if you were watching it. But yeah, no, I think it's, one of the things, this is one of my favorite times of year is, and one of the things that I'm really sad will be missing once we transition to the Super League is the preliminary qualifiers for the Champions League and Confederations Cup, because this is when you get, the proper teams from all over the continent playing each other. And, you have the biggest stars. I mean, we've had Pizzo Mosimane on this podcast and, complaining about going to Tanzania and being given potato pitches to play on. And, there's elements of that where I just love where you can get these upsets. And, even already we've seen some teams, Al Hilal lost their first leg against St. George's, an iconic club from Ethiopia, which hasn't been in the Champions League for 6 or 7 years now. And the return leg is still this weekend. We saw Gaborone from Botswana beating AS Vita, another giant. And the biggest clubs haven't even been introduced yet because they obviously come in the second round. But yeah, no, it's exciting football. It's a shame because I think this is one of the areas where we see why the Super League is being introduced, because the product is so, disjointed. There's not easy ways to watch all the games. We don't have broadcasters connected with them, and that's why the Super League wants to be involved. But it's also a shame because we're going to start losing out on some of these amazing ties, and some of them are incredibly important, not just from an entertainment standpoint from the small teams, but also the fact that they can qualify. It's competitive. We saw Jwaneng Galaxy last season qualify for the Champions League, knocking out Simba, a huge club in the process, and giving a real good account of themselves in a really tough group. And so I think it's really exciting. For me personally, I love this time of year, just watching some of these games. So I'm excited for it.
Zayn, I could listen to Alasdair for hours. His knowledge of continental soccer is without par, for real. It truly is. But speaking to the point you raised, in which way, I do think it's. I don't consider it a sad occasion, personally. I think it's just a new chapter. I've always been an advocate for a Pan-African League, as you can vouch. It's been something I've believed in to the very core of my being in terms of lifting the quality of the proposition that is entertainment and football as a business on our continent. But I also believe that within the format that is being worked on, and let's acknowledge that it's still being fine-tuned, it's not been finalized, there is an acceptance that there has to be opportunities beneath that Super League to encourage, whether it's how people qualify, but to encourage these opportunities where lesser teams are able to challenge some of the more established teams. And this speaks a little bit to what Arsene Wenger was speaking about a few days back when he was talking about FIFA's commitment to assisting the African space in terms of the quality of coaching, because and not just the coaching. I mean, like the proposition that is football as a business on the continent, how the clubs are run, how talent is discovered, how talent is coached, how talent is kept on the continent, the need for finance, the need for support with the women's game, with club football, all the things that come into this ecosystem that makes its way to the very top that eventually will become that Super League. So I think we have an opportunity starting next year to begin to build a new model that maybe could have us have a better and more enjoyable experience, because then Pizzo will speak less of these potato fields where we're having games played. And we know presidents of clubs who had challenges just being able to meet the international requirements. So they'd have a game against a team in Egypt and they don't even know where they begin to get there. There are no flights between the countries. Or the flight itinerary might take you 48 hours to go over maybe 1,000 kilometers, which should have just maybe been a 2.5 hour flight, even if it was by a twin otter. But it's these kind of things that are informing the creation of the Super League, but informing that ecosystem that sits underneath it. And I think we all have a part to play in that reality, not just its narrative, because the experience of somebody like Alasdair, his ability to understand some of these dynamics, it's so rare. So when I hear him speak, it's a true honor to be a part of On the Whistle, to know that we have talent like this who understands some of these teams that are not household names in world football. And they can become if we have the coaching right, if we have the logistics right, if we have the talent right. We've never questioned the passion we have for the game. Now let's just build the structures that can bring the passion to the fore next to professional setups that can take it and make it sustainable for another generation.
Now, Arsene Wenger said to the African Football Business Show, in his capacity as FIFA's chief of global football development, that the first move a player from Africa to Europe is the cheap one. The first move is on average 300,000 euros. But the second move of an African player from a European club to another European club is on average about 3 million euros. That is 10 times more. Francis, with this new product, with this new proposition, do you see that gap of, do you see the player moving from Africa to Europe or Africa to the MLS or wherever in the beautiful world they go? Do you see the monetary value of that player going up by virtue of simply creating a better competition? I know it sounds like an obvious question.
No, no, no.
I want to push in on it.
The truth is, the power is in the simplicity of the thought. It's the fact that even when he starts at 300,000, if in a year you have 10 players who leave Africa for 300,000, that's an exceptional year. The truth is, closer to the 30,000 euro mark is what a player would move for. And more often than not, you'd find players paying for the opportunity, or clubs paying for the opportunity to exhibit their talent abroad. Now, if we're able to add value, and that's the basis of what he was talking about, the justification for prices is rooted in value. So if they don't value the coaching, if the system doesn't value the coaching you've received, doesn't value your technical ability, then the argument can always be made that we're giving you an opportunity you would not have otherwise. If you have opportunity, like if you go, as I mentioned, St. George's. St. George's don't sell many players a year because their players can stay at St. George's in Ethiopia and earn $5, $10, $15,000 a month at home, playing the football that they do love, with the lifestyles that they want, and they have the facilities and the great coaching. Now, they might have personal ambition. Now, if you accompany that with the lesser clubs, like if I come to the winners of the league in Cameroon was PWD, remember, they had a challenge with how they could fulfill their international requirements, but they had their supporters. They reached out to their fan base. They have a dynamic president who reached out to his fan base, and the supporters raised money, bought them a team bus, but that's a dynamic team trying to, I don't know, like catch their tail, if you know what I mean. But what they're trying to do, or what Arsene Wenger is suggesting here, is building a lot more solid foundations at club levels that allows then these clubs to be able to compete alongside all the other marketplaces in the world. Because if you were buying a player out of South America today, it used to be the case that you could go to South America and get an Argentinian player, not for cheap, but a reasonable price. A Brazilian player because they're a dime a dozen. But no Brazilian players leaving Brazil today into the European League less than $1 million USD. But that's because they've understood the importance of adding value. If you remember one of our old conversations, we were talking about Neymar, and I said it took 3 years for him to move because the club was able to say, we can keep you and you can meet your immediate needs at present, and we can add enough value onto you so the club is handsomely rewarded. That's where the African clubs need to move to. And that's what some of us in this game have been fighting for. It's not about one club or one nation. It's about a marketplace that is 1 billion strong, just being able to have a seat at the table because everybody else is benefiting from it, but the African continent. So whether it's player compensation or training compensation, the fees are the rosary. And that's why people don't really have a respect for the African space. So I think it's a good initiative and we look forward to it.
Yeah, and I love what you say about the marketing, right? Because I think that's a really interesting thing is even if the product itself isn't necessarily improved, because I think the product is actually a lot better than it looks, the marketing is what needs to be done. I mean, I was looking just earlier today, I was looking at the kind of requirements that this new point system that Premier League has. And in the UK, we have now post-Brexit for allowing players to come in. And I think there's a lot of problems with it. I think because it was kind of introduced to be like, okay, we're closing down the EU market, but now you can look abroad. And one thing that they did is they upgraded the Copa Libertadores and Sudamericana and introduced a few other South American leagues to the point-based system. So essentially now, if you're a Brazilian, and we saw this with Julian Alvarez, is now you can go straight to England. So you can be signed straight from River Plate.
Speaking to your point, Alistair, forgive me for this, but you make a point that I have to plead to Zayn. One day we must talk about this, because it's true. We were working on two options of young Cameroonian players who are in a team that's 38th in the FIFA rankings, World Cup bound, they're under 25, like this, and they don't get the points. Like, they play for their national team, but they're like at 9.
Yeah.
And I was like, excuse me? And I didn't even realize they had done an extra review afterwards. Somehow it slipped my radar. And then I look back and you're like, whoa, I thought this thing was supposed to level the playing field.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter if you were from the EU, everybody would be on the same. And if your country was doing well, then you'd be, and it doesn't apply to us.
Yeah, but exactly. And there's no African league is on that system. You have like the Chilean league. And like, again, I don't know loads about Chile, but there's no way that it is a stronger and more financially strong than the PSL, for instance, or the Patola Pro. You know, like you were talking about St. George's people being comfortable. You know, in South Africa, we have players on good. In fact, it's usually a criticism because they get too comfortable and they don't want to move.
You can earn about $300,000.
Exactly. And the fact that isn't, and so then the CAF Champions League is below, it's in the category of any other continental competition, is not even mentioned. And I think it's so frustrating because you have so many players who play in the CAF Champions League who just don't have those options. And you know, that's an easy example in England. And, you know, obviously there's other countries that you can move to, but it's the same issue around perception. Because I think, you know, I'm generally very, very critical of the Super League, but I do think that it holds a kind of a potential where if you can actually present this polished, marketable kind of product, is finally you can force these countries that are making life difficult for African players, coaches. You know, we've spoken so much about like people like Pizzo not having the pathways, but if you can give them you essentially put them in a position where they have no reason to deny Africans to come. And I think that's one thing that potentially is exciting and is really speaking to a lot about what Arsene Wenger is saying, is once you can improve not only the product, but the way in which we present the product, is you can start to say, actually, no, we're worth more than this. We're not worth 300K. We're worth 3 million. You know, you can't deny, you know, a player like Taiwo Awoniyi, you know, having to go to Liverpool and be loaned somewhere else because he's, you know, not good enough, or not good enough, and yet now is playing, you know, regular time for Nottingham Forest and played for, you know, Union Berlin for a couple of years. You know, and I think that's the thing that we really need to look for, both from a kind of product standpoint, but also, like you said, Francis, that marketing, saying, you know, look, we have this amazing product. You can't deny us anymore. You can't stop us.
And I promise you that will be a future podcast. So that is a good one to put on the back burner. The Bri has been absolutely cracking. It's been exciting. I said we didn't have a lot of time. We've made a lot of time because this is how a Bri works. As much time as we need to talk about our issues, to ventilate them, to discuss, to disagree, and to have great banter. Francis, Alasdair, it's been fantastic here talking to you about this. And my parting shot is this. Al Ahly, for the last 2 years, have won bronze at FIFA's Club World Cup. If that does not warrant our brothers in Egypt with their league and our competitions being taken more seriously, I don't know what will. We are a megaphone for our people. We are a megaphone for our continent. And we will use this space to help shape and change that. And again, thank you for those listening out there. It's been fantastic. It's been good banter. And we can't wait to meet around the Bri again. And if you've come this far, you better leave a rating and a review. And you better tell us how much you miss Courtney Freeze, the Spirit Cup winner for the last 3 years.
Sure, Courtney had something to say.
Sorry, could you say that again, Francis?
I'm sure Courtney had something to say.
He always does.
He always does, even when he's not
here. Something about defenders doing really well or defenders being exceptional.
It's not like he wasn't a defender, right?
Yeah. And I was asking him if that applied to the Liverpool defense as well.
Gentlemen, a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.